Have you ever felt so nervous before delivering a speech because you were worried you'd forget your lines, you'd bore your audience, or you'd lose control over your own stutter?
When I was a kid, I talk like that.
That's something President Biden certainly can relate to, but his latest speech from this year's White House Correspondents' Dinner celebrating young American journalists is textbook on how to captivate your crowd, not only with your message, but also your delivery. Let's distill 10 key tips that you can apply to your next speech in this week's edition of Speaker Film Study. Tip 1 is BLUF, or bottom line up front.
Let me start on a serious note. Jill, Kamala, Doug, and I, and members of our administration, are here to send a message to the country and, quite frankly, to the world. The free press is a pillar, maybe the pillar, of a free society, not the enemy.
This means that you're capturing the essence of your speech in a single sentence or at most 2 sentences and delivering that message at the very beginning of your speech. When you're trying to create a rallying cry for your audience, it's great to stake your claim around a core belief or value that you have that will ultimately act as the reference point that explains everything else in your speech. And when you do this, you're actually silencing the haters because now you're creating a common value that everyone in the audience can get behind. It's not always great to use BLUF when you're delivering a heartfelt, more personal speech.
But a week later, I get a call, and it's the school. And they say, "Is this Tim Urban?" And I say, "Yeah." And they say, "We need to talk about your thesis." And I say, "Okay." And they say, "It's the best one we've ever seen." That did not happen.
It's much better to lead with a personal story, and that story can last anywhere between 1 to 3 or 4 minutes, and then once you've ended that story, you've arrived at your core thesis, which essentially is the bottom line of your speech. But that is something you don't want to deliver at the beginning because then it'll spoil the story and you'll lose your audience's attention. The second tip is to use signposts. Signposts are short phrases that explain to your audience where you are in the speech and what you're about to say next.
Our message is this: journalism is not a crime. Evan and Austin should be released immediately, along with every other American held hostage or wrongfully detained abroad.
It's particularly important to use signposts because it makes your speech much easier to follow, because otherwise your audience's attention will just naturally dip precipitously towards the middle.
We're doing everything we can to prevent these cases from occurring in the first place. For example, the State Department added the threat of detention as a new risk indicator.
Examples of signposts include numbering your statements like first, second, third, or even saying things like to begin with. Tips 3 and 4 are leaning on core elements of persuasive speaking. In this case, it's pathos, which is appealing to your audience's emotions, and logos, which is appealing to your audience's logical reasoning. With pathos, Biden says this:
every day, their family looks at that empty chair at the kitchen table. Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays without them. The pain of living in limbo, in a sense, is almost worse than the pain of having lost a child and looking at an empty chair.
Notice the details he uses to invite an emotional response from his audience. He paints a very detailed picture of Austin Tice for his audience to visualize.
When he was a kid, he was an Eagle Scout, a big brother, a born protector, a U.S. Marine, 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Austin was a fearless journalist.
He also calls out Austin's mother by her name for everyone in the crowd to look at her.
His mom, Deborah, is here tonight.
And that humanizes Austin way more than just listing off the number of people that are wrongfully detained. For logos, watch what Biden does here.
But we're doing everything we can to prevent these cases from occurring. For example, the State Department added the threat of detention as a new risk indicator. I also recently signed an executive order increasing the consequences for criminal groups and terrorists. Just 2 days ago, my administration announced the first sanctions under this new authority, punishing individuals in security services in Russia and Iran.
To prove that he's not just giving the audience lip service, he lists off a series of actions that the administration has taken. These are trackable things that validate Biden's work. When you can combine aspects of logos, pathos, or ethos, which is establishing your own credibility as a speaker, you're now weaving them together to create a very compelling narrative for your audience.
Unlike last year, Brittany Griner's here with her wife, Cheryl. Brittany, where are you, kid? Stand up, come on. I love this woman.
Tip 5 is to engage directly with an ally in the crowd.
Remember your promise, I get to bring my granddaughter, my all-state girl, to see you, right?
When you call attention to someone by calling them by their name or making direct eye contact with them, how they react is exactly how your audience will react, because your audience will naturally be fixated to your exchange with your ally and they will feel that themselves. This is really powerful, especially when you're delivering a message to a hostile or a skeptical crowd, or if you just feel nervous and you want people to be on your side so you'll feel more comfortable on stage. Tip 6 is how you can eliminate stuttering and those annoying filler words.
You make it possible for ordinary citizens to question authority, and yes, even to laugh at authority without fear or intimidation. That's what makes this nation strong. So tonight, let us show ourselves and the world our strength, not just by the example of our power, but by the power of our example.
Now, what Biden does here is he's learned how to break up longer sentences into digestible chunks, specifically 5 or 10-word phrases. So instead of saying a really long sentence all in one breath,
scenarios to shock the public, make action more popular. Jaworski evidence will be more on the link debate on the K.
he actually breaks it up, and in between the phrase, he'll take a breath before beginning again. This is a really effective method for killing those annoying filler words, and it ultimately establishes you as a way more credible and confident speaker in front of your audience. Tip 7 is to use the anchor.
We're working every day to secure his release, looking at opportunities and tools to bring him home.
The anchor is a core sentence or phrase that you insert throughout different parts of your speech to reinforce your core message.
Paul Whelan, unjustly held in Russia for more than 4 years, whose brave sister I've met with and whose family has never quit fighting for Paul. And I promise you, neither will I, and neither will this administration.
Now, Biden doesn't use the exact same anchor throughout his speech, but they all have the same message, and they all reference the core idea that Biden led off with at the very beginning, which is the free press is one of America's most important values of all. When you have an anchor, your audience will remember that months or even years later, and that's what's most important when delivering a compelling speech.
But my commitment is to bring them home. Just as I know your commitment is to continue to be a free and fearless press.
Tip 8 is to transition with a joke.
Well, I believe in the First Amendment, not just because my good friend Jimmy Madison wrote it. Look.
Whenever you want to go from a very somber, serious tone to a very playful, different topic, it's great to insert a joke. It'll act as a surprise to your audience, and more importantly, it will elicit a very different reaction, which is laughter. And when you get your audience to react like that, you've now reset your crowd so that you can take your topic in any direction you want without having it feel like too big of a jump. Tip 9 is to address the elephant in the room.
You say I'm ancient. I say I'm wise. You say I'm over the hill. Don Lemon would say that's a man in his prime.
This is particularly important when you know that your audience has certain objections or problems that you're anticipating that they're gonna have, to the point where they're not gonna take you seriously or they're not gonna believe your message credible. So when you address those objections up front, you now have a more disarmed audience, so they're probably more likely to listen to you and engage. Tip 10 is to match your vocal delivery with the tone of your message. When you're speaking about a very serious, somber topic, lower your voice, speak more slowly.
When Mrs. Till insisted that an open casket for her murdered and maimed 14-year-old son be the means by which he was transported. She said, let the people see what I've seen.
But when you're speaking about something very exciting, very triumphant, you can speak loudly, you can speak with emphasis and energy.
The reason the world saw what she saw was because of another hero in this story, the black press. That's a fact. Jet Magazine, the Chicago Defender, and other black radio and newspapers were unflinching and brave in making sure America saw what she saw.
The key to remember is that your vocal energy is what transfers emotion to your audience. So however you deliver is however they feel. You ideally don't want to write everything word for word. It's okay to have a structure, but when you can speak from the heart, your speech will be much more powerful. Watch how Coach Deion Sanders does this beautifully right here.